Thank you, Ethan. Good afternoon. My name is Morgan Vina, Vice President of Government Affairs here at JINSA, and welcome to this special webinar marking the release of JINSA's new report, Build It and They Will Come, a U.S. strategy for integrating Middle East air and missile defenses, which you can now access on our website at jinsa.org. This report represents the consensus views of a high-level task force of 4 retired U.S. flag officers convened by JINSA to outline a strategy to help the United States and its Middle East partners confront Iran's unprecedented drone and missile threat. The impetus for the report came in response to last year's passage of the Deterring Enemy Forces and Enabling National Defenses Act of 2022. Known as the DEFEND Act, we're proud that the legislation drew support from some of the recommendations in JINSA's 2022 report called A Stronger and Wider Peace, a U.S. strategy for advancing the Abraham Accords. The act required the Secretary of Defense to submit a report to Congress on the administration's strategy for integrated Middle East air defenses. We're hopeful that the report we're releasing today will serve as a useful source of analysis and policy ideas for both the administration and Congress as they make progress on this important issue that actually enjoys bipartisan support. To help kick off today's event with opening remarks, JINSA is proud to welcome Congressman Whitman and Congressman Brad Schneider, 2 real champions in Congress for the goal of building greater defense cooperation between the United States, Israel, and our Arab partners. Congressman Whitman has represented Virginia's 1st District since 2007. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee as Vice Chairman of the Full Committee and Chairman of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee, which oversees all tactical air and missile defense programs and accounts for the Department of Defense. He'll be followed by Congressman Brad Schneider, who represents Illinois' 10th District, where he is serving his 5th term. He is a member of the House Committee on Ways and Means and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Schneider is also co-chair of the House Abraham Accords Caucus. Congressman Whitman, the floor is yours.
Morgan, thank you. And thank you to JINSA for allowing us this opportunity today. I want to start off by saying that our country and Israel have an unshakable relationship, and that relationship is key to the security of both countries, but especially for peace in the Middle East. And we all know that integrated air and missile defense is critically important, especially today as the threats continue to expand. We look at what's happening in the region with unmanned systems, especially drones. We've seen what's happened in Ukraine with drones. We see also advances in cruise missile technology. We also know, too, that the incredible joint operations that we pursue with the Israelis as it relates to technology in integrated air missile defense. We know that that Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow programs have been incredibly successful, especially with the exchange of technology. And I think that's incredibly important, is making sure we can exchange technology. We understand, too, that as we look into the future, it's incredibly important that we have not just information along the stretch from our sensors to create what's termed a kill chain, and that is to make sure we get information that if there's a threat, we can target it and take it out. But today, kill webs, because we know we have to have layering there. So if our adversaries take out one aspect of our sensors or our communications, we have another part of the system that can step right in and be part of assuring that we can address these threats. The threat scenario today in the Middle East is more complex than it has been in history. We need to make sure we're up for the challenge, and that challenge is not only with the threats, but it's also making sure that we're working hand in hand with allies in the region to make sure we're using their assets, to make sure we combine their assets with our assets to be able to address any threat in the region, but most importantly, to be able to deter threats. The threat scenario there is about assuring that anybody that seeks to do harm to Israel or friends in the region or the United States is going to be met with irrevocable force. And that, to me, is incredibly important, because if there's an opportunity there, then our adversaries will try to take advantage of it. How do we deter that? We make sure that we have a very, very strong system of sensors, systems of communication there, systems of weapons to be able to take out threats that may be posed to Israel or the United States. To me, that's incredibly important. Having that cohesive strategy to determine, okay, as we face these threats, what will we do as a group to address these threats? And then to make sure we practice that. It's not enough just to say we have that, but let's make sure we jointly practice how we would address those threats in the region. Those things are incredibly important. The Abraham Accords is the foundation of how we develop these relationships with friends in the region. The Abraham Accords, I think, is the foundation for us to do even more in the area. The Defend Act is a critically important part of what we're going to do in the United States to continue the policies that will enable friends in the region to work together to make sure we are addressing these threats and to make sure that if faced with these threats, we can defeat these threats. To me, that's incredibly important. And the things that we are doing on the Armed Services Committee is making sure that we're advancing that first step that was brought to us by the Abraham Accords, and to make sure too that our Middle East strategy addresses how we work with our friends and allies there. Another element that's important to that is how do we not only help allies there, but how do we look at ways where we can share technology? Many times we hear frustration from folks in the region that tell us if you would just share some technologies. They don't expect us to share the cutting edge technologies, but just basic technologies, many times technologies that they can buy elsewhere. But because of our requirements in the United States, because of the ITAR requirements, many times the technology is not transferred for fear that it will fall into unfriendly hands. I think we have to be able to put forward an element of trust with our friends and allies in the region and say we are going to share some of that technology, because the United States cannot do it all. And it's incredibly powerful to leverage what our allies can do and what countries like Israel have shown that they can do in addressing these particular threats. So I'm very excited about the potential going forward. Understand too that the United States has to develop greater relationships, both strategically and for that matter, even economically in the region, to assure that we deter those elements in the Middle East that seek to do harm to the United States, to Israel, and to our friends in the region. So I appreciate all that JINSA does. You all are an incredibly important organization to make sure you connect good policy with your efforts in the region, as well as with lawmakers that are in positions to be able to make decisions that move us in the direction of having that stronger element of a strategic presence in the region and an integrated air and missile defense system that's so critical to security and peace in the region. So Morgan, with that, I will yield back.
Thank you, sir. Well said. Congressman Schneider, over to you.
Thanks, Morgan, and Rob, good to see you. As my colleague has said, first of all, JINSA, I'm grateful for what you do. I've known the organization for many, many years, and now being in Congress, have worked closely. But the moment what JINSA does, what we're talking about, Abraham Accords, et cetera, couldn't be more important than at this very particular moment where we are. And I was speaking to a group this morning, and I'm going to repeat myself, but over the last 24 hours, or I guess now 36 hours, Israel took in more than 100 rockets from Gaza. Thankfully, as Rob mentioned, Iron Dome, Iron Dome made sure that the effect of those rockets were less serious than they could have otherwise been had there been a loss of life or catastrophic impact to property. Rob used the term threat scenario and the complexity of the threat scenario. It is as complicated, as complex, and as dynamic as it's ever been in all the time I have followed what's happening in the Middle East. The threat from Gaza over the past 36 hours really was a deflection of what's happening in the West Bank, for example. Hamas has made the decision to stand down in Gaza to build up its strength in the West Bank, in part because of failures within the PA. I can extend it to outside Israel, and we're looking at Lebanon and Syria. 150,000 rockets that are becoming increasingly lethal and increasingly precise because of Iran's engagement, but threatening Israel and our allies. Iran is in Syria, and then the dynamic going on in Yemen. last number of years, there's been an attack from Iran on a Saudi oil refinery. And you can just look back to last year when, and all this comes connected, as Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, is landing in UAE, UAE systems take down rockets fired from Iran. So the need for missile defense is growing by the day. The challenges are also growing by the day. It is not sufficient for one country operating alone. Again, as Rob touched on, it is incredibly important that countries in the region, the United States and others, are sharing intel and technology in a way that doesn't threaten our national security, but enhances our security as well as the security of the region. I think that's really was the impetus behind the Deter Act last year. Morgan, as you touched on, it came in part from some of the input that we received from GINSA, and we're grateful for that and looking for additional input in that way. It is vitally important. It was bipartisan. At this time in this world, to say bipartisan is a breath of fresh air,
Yes.
but sometimes even harder than bipartisan. It was bicameral.
Yes.
Dealing with the folks on the other side of the Capitol, I would argue, is oftentimes more difficult than what we're facing within the chamber of the House. And so I call it Deter, I meant Defend Act, but the Defend Act is an example of the things that we need to really focus on and build upon. There's a whole bunch of other things to be concerned about, which Rob didn't talk about. The fact that the reestablishing relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran were initiated is not necessarily a bad thing. They've had relations before. The fact that it's a reflection of China's growing influence in the region is something that should give us all a pause. Why is that important? Well, it's important because the United States has interests in this region, but we need to understand that our allies have interests and concerns, and we need to allay those concerns and give them confidence that the United States is going to be their partner for the long term. The Abraham Accords, the Defend Act, the other things that we're doing all contribute to that vector of progress, ensuring that our allies are going to be working with us, relying on us, and vice versa. We're going to be working and relying on them. This is a region that we are not going to leave, have no desire to leave, but we need to make sure that our allies understand that we're there for the long term as well. And so the collaboration we do, the work that we do will continue. The conversations you all will have over the course of this afternoon are going to help inform us to what we need to do to ensure that we move forward. I look forward to working not just with Rob, but also with GINSA and so many others to make sure that we are protecting our interests, securing the region, bringing peace, prosperity, and hope to all the people of the region. And in particular, as things are quiet at the moment on Gaza, making sure that Israel has the ability to protect herself by herself, but in conjunction, lifting up the region as a whole as well. And so with that, let me yield back and turn it back to you guys.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We really appreciate it. Before we move to our second portion of the panel, would just like to express GINSA's deep appreciation for the work that you do and for your service. And we look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. Enjoy the rest of recess, or I should say district work period.
Yeah. Work period.
Well, Morgan, thank you. And Brad, thank you. Thanks for your leadership. You've been incredibly effective on this and look forward to continue to work with you.
Ditto. Look forward to work with you as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Morgan.
Take care.
Thanks.
And now I am pleased to welcome David Sanger, who will moderate our discussion with GINSA's task force members on our report's highlights. David is the New York Times' national security correspondent. He has been part of 3 teams that won Pulitzer Prizes, most recently in 2017 for international reporting. His newest book, The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age, and an HBO documentary by the same title, examined the emergence of cyber conflict and its role in changing the nature of global power. GINSA's task force members include General Mike Hostage, former commander of Air Combat Command and former commander of the U.S. Air Force's Central Command, Lieutenant General Joseph Guastella, former Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations in the U.S. Air Force, who is also one of General Hostage's successors as commander of U.S. Air Force's Central Command. Lieutenant General David Mann, former commander of U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command, Army Forces Strategic Command, and Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense. And finally, Lieutenant General Trey Oberring, former director of the U.S. Missile Defense Agency. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining us. David, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for both this report and for putting together this good discussion. And I'm glad to be here with the four generals. Here's our plan. We've got about 40 minutes to talk through the report itself, which is a fairly quick read. It's about 45 pages long. It's an excellent executive summary for those who have not seen it. And basically, it makes the argument that the Iran threat has expanded so quickly, as we've heard from General Kurilla, the commander of Central Command, over the past few years, that we need, beyond an integrated air defense, we need an air defense that involves both sensors and common action among countries that are not used to acting militarily together, and in fact have at various moments gone to war with each other in the past. So the geopolitics of the Middle East, and particularly the successor state to the Abraham Accords, is an integral part of what it is that we're trying to see whether it's possible in the way of air defenses. So let me start with General Gostella. With your relatively recent experience as the commander of the coalition air forces in the Middle East, tell me a little bit about how the threat has evolved, both the drone threat and the missile threat, and whether or not the defenses we've had have kept up with the way this threat has unfolded.
David, thank you for the question. And the threat is significant, and it's grown throughout the years as Iran has studied ways to leverage opportunities to hold targets at risk across the region. Our targets, U.S. positions, as well as all the Gulf allies and Israel. And, you know, on my watch, during that time I was there, we suffered an attack of 12 Iranian ballistic missiles into our air bases, two of them that were also undefended by any Patriots. They were eerily precise. They were very powerful, and they could have killed significant numbers of U.S. service members. We were fortunate and able to get a lot of folks out of there before the attack, but it was clear the capabilities they had with their ballistic missiles, and they have a deep arsenal, a deep magazine of those ballistic missiles. But even more concerning, David, are the drone or one-way drone, if you will, kamikaze cruise missile type of threats that they have, because not only are they capable of launching them, they're also capable and have demonstrated it, giving those out to their proxy forces, which allow the attack axes to come from almost any direction. Israel, Saudi Arabia basically has to be on a 360 scan to see where threats could come from. That could emanate from across the Arabian Gulf, from up the Red Sea, or from the north, from Syria or Iraq. And so those threats, while not as powerful as ballistic missiles, are also very precise, and they're very hard to detect. And that is exactly what we saw with the strike on the Abqaiq facility in Saudi Arabia. Very, very precise weapons that took a big portion of the Saudi oil production offline temporarily. They got it back very quickly, but that's thanks to their work. But the threat is significant. And the ability to detect all of these launches, especially the drone type of attacks, is not where it should be. They're not detected at sufficient ranges, and the information isn't shareable or currently being shared as effectively as it could to protect the countries in the region.
Let's break that down just a little bit and briefly. So the attack of the 12 missiles into the airbase, and remind us of the date of that. That was about 2
That
years,
was on
3 years,
I believe 8th of January of 2020.
2020. So it's 3 years ago. You picked it up, so you had a sensor system to see it coming in plenty of time. You had no Patriot system available to take it out. Is that right? And why not?
That is correct. Well, we just can't cover everything. We have a limited number of air defense assets, and they weren't positioned at those bases. Remember, we were there to fight ISIS, fight the Al-Qaeda, counterterrorism. We weren't there to engage Iran. So we had an exposed attack surface that the enemy took advantage of.
Okay. And then the second question on the drone threat, and we'll get on to this with some other panelists as well. Of course, the advantage of drones for the Iranians, and one of the reasons that their drones have been popular with the Russians in recent times, is that this offers an opportunity to literally fly under the radar and, as you say, come in from other directions. We're seeing a lot of new technology right now for anti-drone defense. Of those, what seems most likely to be a quickly deployed solution to the problem?
Well, some of the other panelists may be able to answer that a little better. I do think in the end, as we can perfect directed energy, both laser or possibly high power microwave, results in the best cost to kill ratio, if you will, because right now it is a significant cost imposing strategy on us. If we're engaging a relatively inexpensive drone with a Patriot missile, well over $1 million, or an AIM-120 AMRAAM, well over $1 million, it is a significant cost imposing strategy on us. So directed energy, I think, affords us the most effective opportunity, but it still needs a degree of development and fielding, and of course, like we mentioned before, the sensing that alerts the batteries that something's coming.
Yeah, I would agree. Directed energy is probably the most cost efficient. It may also be the least timely at this point. Right?
Yes.
Let's go on to General Hostage. You are probably the one out of this entire group who's been retired the longest. So tell us, what are the biggest changes you've seen as you were working on the report since you retired? And remind us what year you retired.
I retired in January of 2015. I served in the region as the absent commander from 2009 to 2011. In that time, the Iranian ballistic missile threat was as large as it is today. I mean, many thousands of missiles with potential reach all throughout the region, to all the Gulf partners and Israel as well. But it wasn't terribly sophisticated. Their circular error problem, which is their ability to hit a target, was sketchy. They'd have to send a barrage of missiles at a target to make sure they actually hit what they were aiming at. That's gotten far more sophisticated over the years. The proliferation of ballistic missiles I don't believe has grown all that much. I'm only privy to the information I get out in the unclassified world now since retirement. But I haven't read of any great numbers of proliferation. But what they have proliferated is the ability to spread their drones and their other types of weaponry to fellow actors in the region. As Gus said, dispersing the threat across a much broader threat axis, and which essentially overwhelms your ability to cover the space, the region. Well, when I was in place in 9/11 with a combination of Aegis cruisers and THAAD and Patriots, we felt reasonably certain we could shield our emplacements and our allies from the majority of threat that was out there. But we were looking at a fairly limited threat axis. There aren't enough Aegis cruisers in the inventory anymore to cover the threat axis as it stands now. And the idea of a layered defense at the time was fairly effective for the ballistic missiles. But we don't have the layers to deal with a pervasive drone threat. The drone threats can come from any axis. I mean, they don't have to come in a straight line. And you have to have radar coverage, and the radar coverage that's networked together. Because if somebody up close sees the drone go by, unless that information gets to the potential target much deeper into friendly territory, it's irrelevant that you saw it. They have to be able to pass the information back and forth. That we were working that problem back when I was there. I'm sure Gus was working it hard as he left. I know the current commander is working the problem, but it's a challenging problem. Networking those allies together involves sharing and connecting their state secrets, their state capabilities, and exposing their limitations to their neighbors, which is not something that they're culturally happy to do, nor frankly are we.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that is the only way we're going to advance a defense, an integrated air to missile defense, is to get the integration down to a data level, not just a telephone level, not just a communications level, but sharing data that travels in microseconds, as opposed to telephone calls that take minutes or worse.
General Hostage, I was just in Taiwan, where there's a very parallel issue underway. As you can imagine, they're concerned about both short range and medium range missiles from China. The whole region, of course, is concerned about a greater missile threat from North Korea. The Chinese, there is no one better at good as the Iranian drones are. The Chinese are better. If you had to choose, and I'm not sure it would necessarily have to be a choice, but these are expensive. If one had to choose between doing what you've recommended in this report first in the Mideast, or doing it in and around Taiwan, what would you advise?
Well, you don't have 20 plus countries all in the same clustered around the island Taiwan, all worrying about integrating their defenses to be able to defend themselves and each other. We have the island of Taiwan. That's a relatively focused problem. That I think that's being well addressed at the moment. The problem is the adversary is just totally overwhelming. So the real answer in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific, I spent time out there as the vice commander of PACAF, so I'm well familiar with the war plans and the challenges of it. Deterrence is the answer there. It is keeping the Chinese from thinking that there's any possibility of success without great costs. And they're very calculated culture, and they will hold off until they think they have the right answer. And if we just have to convince them they don't have the right answer. I don't think you have near the level of calculation or rational thinking going on north of the Arabian Sea. I think it's far more driven by fanaticism and emotion than it is logical thought. So here we need in the Middle East, we need to present a strong, capable defense. And I think Congressman Whitman said, we need to exercise it at a level that the adversary looking across the water says, this is going to be really dangerous. We don't have much help with success if we go after it. But the real answer is we can't trade Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific region for the Middle East. That's a failed path, because the Chinese are messing around in the Middle East. They're messing around in the Indo-Pacific region. They're egging the Russians on in Ukraine, all to achieve their goal of becoming the lead dog in the pack. And that is that unipolar world that we have enjoyed up until now is threatened by that path.
We'll come back to that exact point in just a bit. General Obering, you've been very patient. You could help us along here by explaining, as the report does so well, but sort of boiling this down, what integration actually would look like in the Middle East and why it's more valuable than having the Israelis and the US and a few others sort of do their thing separately here.
Well, thank you very much, Megan. By the way, I'm the longest retired. I retired in 2009. So, you know, I'll try to look younger than the other ones,
You've won
so.
the prize here, yeah.
But first of all, let me talk about what is integrated air and missile defense at a very basic level. And to start with, as was mentioned in the report, it's the netting of a variety of sensors which can detect, track, and target enemy missiles, aircraft, and drones to provide a common operational picture for the warfighters, as was described in the Jensen report. Now, the sensors can be land-based, sea-based, air, or space-based. The ability to tie these sensors, that's the first element. The second element is the ability to tie these sensors to a variety of shooters in order to destroy the threats at longer ranges or over greater areas or on a faster timeline than can be accomplished operating individually. And the shooters can include aircraft, interceptors, and other kinetic weapons or non-kinetic weapons, as was mentioned, such as lasers and high-powered microwave devices. And probably the last and most important element of integrated air and missile defense is the necessary command, control, battle management, and communications capability to realize these synergistic effects that can be achieved. Now, I could go into a hypothetical about country A and country B in the Middle East, but let me give you a more real world, an actual scenario that took place when I was a director of the Missile Defense Agency. If you looked at protecting Japan from a North Korean missile threat, it took us 3 Aegis ships with their spy radars and SM-3 missiles to provide the necessary defended area of Japan from the North Korean threat. Just by integrating a land-based TPY-2 radar that's associated with the THAAD system that we have operating in what we call a forward-based mode, by integrating that radar that was located in Shiriki, Japan, with 1 Aegis ship, we can provide the necessary defended coverage for the entire island chain just using that 1 ship. And so that gives you an idea of the power of integration. So in essence, if you think about it, you are using the kill web that was described earlier by Congressman Whitman, the ability to tie all these sensors together, tie them to a variety of interceptors and weapons. You can greatly expand either the launch area denied or the defended area that you are able to provide. And that's what really is synergistic about integrated air and missile defense.
Very good. Well, that is enormously helpful to us. Tell me, where is the best model of this working right now in the world?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I would say that, first of all, our own integrated missile defense system that we have been deploying since 2004 is a pretty good example, where we had Aegis ships stationed in the Sea of Japan that were tied into our ground-based missile defense capabilities in California and in Alaska. And the ability to tie all of the netted sensors that we have, everything from the forward-based Aegis ship spy radars to the sea-based X-band radar to the land-based radars at Cobra Dane and Beale Air Force Base, all of that was netted together and tied into a fire control system for our ground-based missile defense. And in addition, we were providing a common operational picture through our command, control, battle management, and communication program, C2BMC, and providing that common operational picture to command centers from Washington to Colorado to Hawaii to even Europe. So I think that's probably the best on a very large scale integrated missile defense picture that you could provide.
And let me ask you the same question I asked General Hostage, which is, we're in a world of limited resources. If you had to pick doing this in the Mideast region, as you've written a report on because of the Iran threat, or you had to pick Taiwan because you really think that 2027 is a real date for the Chinese. It's the date, of course, that Xi Jinping has said that he wanted the PLA ready to take the island. Which would you start first?
Well, Dave, I wish we had that luxury, but we don't. We have to start and address both of those. And we have to allocate our resources accordingly to be able to do that. And I would say, just as General Hostage described, they are very different situations in terms of the protection of Taiwan and the defense of Taiwan and what we're trying to do in the Middle East to protect against the Iranian threat. I think that both are extremely important. I think that the Taiwan fight, in my mind, is one that is has the ability to escalate faster than anything else. But again, it's an easier challenge in terms of integration than when we're talking about the Middle East. And I think the reason why the Middle East is so important also is that while it would be difficult and challenging because of some of the political factors that were described in the report, we have a plethora of US platforms that are already in the area with some of these countries, and being able to use those in a netted fashion, along with some of the national assets that these countries have, I think could go a long way to trying to deter Iran the same way we're trying to deter China.
Great. Let me turn to General Mann, who's been wins the JINSA Patience Award for panelist who's been waiting the longest for a question here. So General Carrillo was up doing some testimony recently, and he noted that we're sort of in a race between this US effort to integrate the region that you describe in the report, and pieces of which he's certainly seems to have embraced in his first year or so at Central Command, and China's effort to penetrate the region and gain more influence. That key part of that being their role in trying to bring together Saudi Arabia and Iran diplomatically. Talk to us a little bit about the Chinese role here, because while we have seen them interested in taking a diplomatic role here, we haven't seen them take much of a military defensive role, except if you believe those one of the leaked documents, which suggested that in fact they are trying to build some kind of base in the UAE.
Yeah, very good question, and quite frankly, the Chinese are not taking any kind of a tactical pause. They're trying to take advantage of every opportunity that they can to make inroads into a region, whether it's in the AFRICOM area of responsibility. Heck, they were trying to sell missile defense systems to the Turks. And so I think they're trying to take advantage of every opportunity to come in and sell or be a part of a defense strategy for an area. There may be the perception out there that we're very, very focused on the Indo-PACOM AOR, and as my esteemed colleagues have noted, we got to look at multiple regions at the same time. And so that's the reason why it's so important that we continue to be that leader in the Middle East. Quite frankly, our Gulf Cooperation State partners there kind of look to the U.S. To really kind of lead the charge. And over the years, a lot of our partners in that region would only do kind of negotiations with the U.S. They weren't willing to really talk to their neighbors for many historical type reasons, many decades and hundreds of years in the making, quite frankly. But since CENTCOM has really taken the leadership role in this, and from General Hostage time all the way forward, we've seen more of a willingness to work together as a team to really address this threat emanating from Iran. They understand that even though maybe the numbers of TBMs hasn't really grown that substantially in Iran, what has grown is the sophistication and the accuracy. And so what we have been trying to do is come together as a team, integrate our sensors. Quite frankly, in my humble opinion, I think the integration of sensors is like the number one priority that I would focus on. It doesn't take a lot of money. We're not talking about putting or buying a lot of THAAD or Patriot units. What we're saying is you've already made an investment. Let's take that investment and maximize and optimize that investment, so that instead of just picking up a phone call, country X, and calling up the KOC and saying, hey, I think I see something on my scope. No, it's sent digitally. And by doing so, you increase the speed of getting that target to the warfighter, number one, but also through the digitization of a lot of our sensors, we're able to make sure that the data that we give to the warfighter is the best data that we can give them, so that we don't have to expend all of our interceptors going against a threat coming in. Because quite frankly,
Sure.
we got a calculus problem. We will never have enough interceptors for all the TBMs out there. So we got to be smart with what we got.
So that raises an interesting question. It's hard to imagine, even after the Chinese agreement, that that you would see many of these players be willing to transmit data that reveals their capabilities to neighbors who at some point in the future might be an enemy, right? Maybe the Saudis and Israel would do this together, but my guess is they'd be a little cautious. Maybe the UAE would, but as we said, they've got a burgeoning relationship with the Chinese.
Yeah.
Is there a structure that you can think of in which basically the US was running a central area where all these sensors came in, and each of the separate nations were basically sitting around, sort of like the integrated centers that you see for cyber in the United States, where you're seeing, every different US government agency that normally doesn't talk to each other, right?
Yeah, quite frankly, I think what we're proposing is that the KAOC be that center that you're talking about, where country X, Y, or Z shares their data with the KAOC, who does the correlation and then broadcast out the data.
And who runs the KAOC?
I think that the KAOC, the Combined Arms Operations Center,
right?
Something that
who
General
runs,
Hostage.
Who runs?
I'll tell you what. Let me turn this over to General Hostage, my former boss, and let him kind of expand on that.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the KAOC, even back in my day, was the kind of the central node. Back then, though, we had telephone connectivity because nobody would share computer data.
Sure.
That's been upgraded. We're trying to work on building that common picture, taking feeds from everybody's sensors, bring them in, homogenizing them in the central system, then sending out that common picture to everyone.
Great.
Trying to get everybody at the same time to change their level of commitment is going to be damn near impossible. But we think, and one of the things we talked about is, as the panel helped work this report, was let's start with a couple of key players who have the highest probability of successful integration and willingness to integrate, and get them into a relationship at a higher level, and then let the others look at it and decide, hey, yeah, we could do that too. There's a thread of emotion out there in the region where they don't like to be left behind. When they see others doing something that looks beneficial both to them and their allies, they want to be a part of it. So it's kind of like the build it and they will come. So don't try to get all 20 of them together at the same time at the higher level. Pick one, pick two, and bring them in. We know Israel will happily come. What we need to do is find somebody who will come in with Israel and with us and get to that higher level, and then demonstrate the efficacy of that, and then bring the others along as they're willing and able to do that. And
basically, the coalition of the willing.
That's right, a coalition of the willing, and the ones that are left out at some point will want to be willing. But then the next level we have to get them to is where they're willing to shoot to defend someone else, because the nature of these weapons are that they transit other countries getting to their target. And so if the country that's being overflown is willing to engage and defend someone behind them using one of their assets, we have to help facilitate that. Keep them their magazines, they're populated, and take away the things that keep them wanting to husband their shooters just for their own protection of their own assets. We need to get them into a mindset of regional protection of assets versus just protecting home. It's going to be a matter of growth over time.
General Gastel, does that make sense to you?
It absolutely does. David, this entire thing that's being described is begging for U.S. leadership. It's begging for it, a regional approach to the Middle East, not just bilateral with all the nations. And to your point before, those countries, if we give them the assurance that we have the structure, which we have an elementary version of already in the KAOC run by CENTCOM, where they can provide data, and it's not gonna sacrifice their sovereignty. It's in the greater good for them to share the data for the protection they'll receive. And by the way, it's not Saudi giving it to a neighboring country like Israel. It's the Saudis sharing it with the KAOC. It's the Kuwaiti radars sharing it with the KAOC. Then the KAOC creates a common picture that then is redistributed to everyone. So it's a common understanding of what's happening. We have a rudimentary version of it now, but it can easily be robusted. And it starts with US leadership. It can build right now, it's telephonic passing of information, but that could actually, like was stated before, can grow very quickly once we link it together with some technology. But to your point before, it should never be a choice between Taiwan in that scenario and the Middle East. We're America. We can do both. This report, this GINSA report, does not say spend $1 billion. It doesn't say put in 10,000 troops in the Middle East. It says you need U.S. leadership, policy that advocates this, and then build it, they will come, as General Hostage said. Let's get 1 or 2 nations on board, plug their feeds in, and others will do the same.
Just to kind of pile on with what General Costello said, this is where it gets back to your earlier point, David, about the Chinese. This is where we cannot take a chance of having a leadership void in the Middle East. People are looking to the United States to continue to lead, and that's why it's so important that we continue with our integration efforts, working with our regional partners to enhance their security throughout the region.
So what you're describing is a diplomatic effort before it's a technological effort, right? Because the hard part here is getting the countries to agree. The KAOC is the sort of neutral central ground, the playground they're all willing to come to because it's avoids a lot of their territorial and traditional issues together. Strikes me as the kind of thing that many a Central Command commander and many a White House Middle East coordinator have tried in the past and failed at. Tell me why you think that we would be any more successful this time. Who wants to bite first on that?
The number one reason we're going to be more successful is the severity of the threat. The Iranian ballistic missiles have struck our bases. The Iranian drones have peppered the kingdom. They've come from all the directions. We are one catastrophe away from everybody going, why haven't we done this? And so what has changed is the threat and the recognition of the fact if we don't do something, the countries are, as we know, if they just, all they can rely on is their own defenses and their own radars, they're going to be shooting behind the target.
Well, and Gus, the Abraham Accords is another reason why there's a better opportunity, because there's movement in the Middle East to come together with the inclusion of Israel, recognizing that the real threat is north of the Arabian Sea. And we've got to be mindful of the threat coming from Asia into that region, trying to disrupt the coalition of the willing that we've been building.
And David, if I could chime in, this is not a technological challenge. Another thing that's changed is the technology. So we have the integration technology. We have the resources of multi-level security capabilities. We have the integration capabilities we talked about. That is all available. This is a matter of will and leadership, frankly. Great.
Well, we are not out of questions for all of this, but we are, I'm afraid, out of time. But I thank you all. The report is a fascinating one. It'd be interesting to see how well this is taken up in Congress. It's really it's really your effort to build a commentary on the Defend Act and sort of what you need to do next. Have any of you taken this to Central Command or to White House Middle East folks at the NSC yet?
I believe that's the path GINSA's on now, but with the release of the report, but not,
Mhm.
we've been involved in building the report, not yet proliferating.
Not proliferating. Well, this was our first proliferation effort here today.
Absolutely.
Great. I want to thank all four of you for doing this, and I want to thank Jinsa, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you taking the time today. And to all of our panelists, thank you. And to everyone who is involved in making this report come together. We deeply appreciate your time and your effort. And with that, this concludes our webinar. Have a wonderful day.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.